deep dive with Taylor Mammon. Just quickly before we get going, with us today we have...
Ollie Mammon, Oliver Mammon.
James Taylor.
Edward Martin.
And Nathan Wogman.
Amazing, we've got a great little team together. And the conversation today is kind of broken up into two parts. There is general understanding what distillate is and what isolate is. These are both extraction methods, but I'll let Ollie and Nathan explain more. And the second part is to talk about CBD as a whole and what the price point is. And currently is, don't know what makes people laugh, but what the price point is, how that's being conveyed from the raw ingredient all the way to end product.
We like to laugh at Taylor Mammon. We have a good time. We enjoy our working environment.
I'm slightly
Don't hate on
concerned.
us.
Sorry, anyway, right, I'm back in the room now.
Back in the room.
Yeah.
Right, so if we were to explain distillate versus isolate, like top level, Ollie, do you want to, like the 30-second explanation?
Fine, so isolate is CBD and distillate is a fruit salad. You know, it has a plethora of different ingredients. It's an amalgamation. It's not a singular. So when you're using a CBD distillate, you're not using a CBD, you're using a CBD with a direction, either from the terpenes or the other cannabinoids. And cannabinoids, even in very, very, very small quantities, make a very big difference. Isolate is consistent. It's always going to be a 99.9% purity. It is just CBD, and a distillate, like I said, is just other cannabinoids.
I think when we talk about different potencies of CBD, obviously there's an understanding that if you were able to effectively cold press a hemp plant, that it excretes an oil which is in a low percentage CBD content. There are then man-made processes that take this naturally occurring level of CBD and purifies that through a number of different processes. And the process of distillation, distilling this base oil, produces CBD in a higher potency because you're distilling it. Although, Ollie may disagree, but I think the better distillates that we like to use are probably 60, 70 odd percent CBD, the rest being other cannabinoids. And there are certainly some needs and requirements to have a purer form of CBD, which is when it goes through an isolation process where they isolate the compound that is CBD and leaves you with something which is as close to 100% pure as you're going to get. So I think
that makes more sense.
So what happens is you start with a plant, as Nate said, and the plant has maybe 12% CBD in the entire plant. So what will happen is you'll take this plant and you run it through almost an ethanol extraction or something like that, and you'll end up with an extract, and this extract will be all the essence of the plant. You could say all of the compounds and waxes and fats and lipids and terpenes, everything without the majority of plant matter. There still will be residual plant matter, and you'll end up with something which is like an 8 to a 12% extract from your 12 to 16% plant that you start with. Then what happens is this extract is then taken one of two ways. It's either passed through a denaturing, a dewaxing, you could call it a refining process, in which lipids and fats and plant matters and things are removed, and terpenes and cannabinoids are kept. And what you happens is you have almost like a split, all right? Or then you have a distillation process in which this matter is you could say fractionally distilled, like many other oils are, and different cannabinoids with different temperature breakdowns are separated off at different moments. And what happens then, you have that's where isolation is then basically occurs, and then you have more refining and more cleaning through there's more refining and more cleaning to then refine those distilled extracts into isolates. Now, sometimes what will happen is these cannabinoids, they break off at similar levels. So it's very hard actually to take something with a starting plant with a super high percent CBD, because there are always higher percents of other cannabinoids in there. So that very often you'll find that a distillate will never have consistency. The distillate will always be ever changing. and those other cannabinoids can't really be controlled, but what can be controlled is the amount of CBD they purify it down to, whereas isolation, they can take away all of the other cannabinoids which are undesirable, not wanted, the waxes, the plant matters, the lipids, the fats, can all actually be removed through the last stage of isolation, which happens after the distillation process. So it's pretty complex stuff, but what happens is it's all about what you want from the product. So the main thing with isolate and distillate is what do you actually want to get from your CBD product? You know, someone who designs products, I know that distillate has a value. Why? Because when you talk about distillate, you talk about everything from a 65% dominant CBD extract to a 65% dominant THC extract. They're both distillates.
But I suppose the confusion comes in on for the consumer on the shelf where they've used a full spec,
never full spec.
A broad spec CBD product, when in reality it's that may have worked for them, but in reality it might not necessarily be the CBD that's worked for them. It could be
the other cannabinoids.
So
if
that's the entourage effect, isn't it? And that's like I say, it's the mix of different cannabinoids produce a certain effect, which relieve or don't relieve certain ailments.
So when you've got issues sleeping, it's not actually the CBD that's helping you sleep; it's that 1% CBN that's in there. And that's
we've also said it from the beginning, like when we've had first started working in the industry, and we would see references to 1200 milligram CBD oil from distillate. It's the labelling in itself is confusing because it's not 1200 milligrams of CBD in an oil. It's actually 1200 milligram of
the
hemp oil or distillate, of which it contains a varying amount of CBD, and I think that's
illegal cannabinoids.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the backbone of how poor labelling has got to the point of where it's got to, because it started on a very slippery slope with people not really not necessarily doing anything untoward. They just weren't. They didn't understand the.
Well, what about? Sorry to interrupt. What about, say, novel food with a broad spec and an isolate? There'll be more consistency, or we'd hope there'd be more consistency, right, in a broad spec product.
It is. The broad spec, generally speaking, is pretty consistent. We're always buying between a certain percentage and a certain percentage. It doesn't really vary out of.
But what about the other
cannabinoids? The other do vary, and the terpene profile varies, and distillates.
Not in a regular supply from the same place. They've got a regulated process. It doesn't change. A terpene profile doesn't change from batch to batch from the same supplier that we buy.
No, but percentages of products do change, and the percentage of CBD does change, and it's a very important thing. You look at a broad spectrum distillate certificate of analysis, you'll very often see ND, non-detect. Non-detect doesn't mean it's not there. It means they haven't gone and looked for it. They haven't gone and spent the hours and hours and hours to find it. If you go looking for anything, you will find anything. If you go looking for something, you only find that something. Now, they don't do either. What they do is they look for CBD and they look for other cannabinoids, which we want to talk about. The THC is very rarely, detected. I think that's very often with distillate is a fabricated response, because, THC has a big impact on other cannabinoids, and a lot of products do get double validated, triple validated, and they are seen to have milligrams or 2 or 3, which is something. It's not a percentage, but it is something, and that can't be ignored. It really can't.
I just want to bring Ed in, because obviously, Ed, you deal with this on front line in terms of people coming in to Taylor Mammon asking about a product they want to kind of formulate, etc., in the R&D process. Like, is there a general sense of distillate, I want distillate, or I want isolate, or lack of knowledge? Like, what is the general coming at you?
I'd say the biggest difference is people's comfort with THC. So with distillate, there's always going to be a very small and under compliancy, less than 0.2% THC. With isolate, it's going to be 0.0, and then it comes down to branding. Would the client be comfortable enough to put THC free on their packaging? A lot of companies do that. So that's just from reverse engineering the packaging and how you present it, to the public. But in my opinion, most people are asking about distillates. They want to be more educated on kind of the entourage effect. It's something that they've read about online. It's something that they want to learn more about. And I'm always happy to chat to people about that.
And don't you find, sorry, I was just going to say, it's kind of bizarre because there are a number of different products that are being marketed as distillate. And they are, and I suppose you look at the COA and the purity of CBD is at such a high level that it's clearly been mass engineered and tampered with, and it's actually giving people something that they think they want, which is a very high potency CBD product, 80-90% CBD, the other 10% being very negligible levels of other minor cannabinoids. What they're actually buying, in my opinion, is a watered down version of isolate, which actually costs more money. True broad spectrums, as we were discussing before, the 60-70% with the additional 30-40% made up of mixed cannabinoids, giving you genuine entourage effect.
Right.
We see that quite a lot because people are disappointed perhaps by the effect of using this high potency distillate when in fact it's a man-made compound to service an uneducated consumer.
Yeah, but I guess that was the question I wanted to ask is a lot of people talk about entourage effect and like full plant extract.
Can
right?
I take this?
Yeah, I was just going to say
finish the question perhaps.
I was just going to say that like the entourage effect, is it true, like based on that analogy that you said in terms of the high CBD strength, to claim that entourage effect against that seems a bit nonsensical, but on your true relative 70% strength.
Well, Ollie's claimed the question, so
Answer the question. I'll do my run afterwards.
No, please.
Fine. So basically, what I want to say is,
Sorry, Ed.
there's a lot of miseducation. There's a lot of misinformation, and it all goes back to where people are learning from. Most people learn about cannabinoids from the internet, and the majority, especially up until the last 2 years, so over the last 8 years, 7 years, a lot of the information about CBD has come out of America. Now, in America, when they use words like full spectrum, it means something completely different to what we understand full spectrum to mean. Broad spectrum was then created by the other states outside of the legal cannabis states in America as a terminology to describe also a much more legal cannabinoid blend. Then those terminologies from those papers, which are those reports and those blogs which people have read, makes them start to see that the entourage effect is very much linked to full spectrum. Yes, I completely agree with that. We can't get those products in the UK. A true full spectrum must contain a full spectrum. It needs to have everything. You can't have a rainbow with 3 colours. It's not a rainbow. It's 3 colours. It'll be a flag. It's something else. So what happens is you have this entire understanding, this entire education structure of our nation is built upon a lie.
But
it doesn't exist.
A natural, call it natural formulation or a natural extraction that is being claimed as full spectrum, with natural amounts of CBD being under 2% of the particular country's legislation.
Do you mean THC?
THC. Surely that is still a full spectrum product, but it's not.
So you have CBDV illegal in the UK. You have CBN illegal in the UK. You have THC illegal, THCA illegal. You have
the Delta 9s, Delta 8s, and all
No,
those.
but under a certain percentage, right?
No, the what? Slightly deviating from the subject, full spectrum, as Ollie is explaining, is the full spectrum, the plethora of the chicken soup, every element of the plant. When people talk about entourage effect, I may be slightly wrong or not, it does happen, that the entourage effect is for full plant extract. It's not, and that's where it works best. We have a watered down version of that. So I think the point that we're trying to get to in terms of crystallization is that we don't have the full spectrum. So the entourage effect, as we understand it, is a watered down version of it.
Like all of these things that you're saying are illegal, right? Delta 9, CBN, CBD.
It's a controlled substance, yeah.
At what perimeter?
At 1 milligram a container.
Well,
okay.
And that's
THC as well.
And
over 1 milligram is illegal.
So what I'm saying
is a lie.
What I'm saying
that's
is
debatable. That point is debatable, the 0.2% or 0. Whatever it is per milligram, because the legislation that specifically speaks about THC presence in hemp and CBD products only specifically talks about the cultivation of it. So that whole 0.2 as being a legal threshold or whatever in a milligram container is totally debatable.
0.2 is 200 milligrams.
I agree, but
if you bring into the UK 3 tons of CBD infused face cream, and they take a swab and they do the math that on that swab there's over 200 milligrams, and that 3 tons is illegal. And that is where the issue comes in. So they're like, no, there's less than 0.2% of your bottle. It's not about that. The product started life illegal. So it doesn't make a difference how many hands it passes through and how many people tell you these minor cannabinoids, which everyone claims to give an entourage effect, which I can personally say, I've never felt the difference between a bastardized CBD, all right, which is not a real full spectrum, which is what we get in the UK, or an isolate. I don't feel a difference between the two. Okay, so when people talk about CBD with this and that, it has the entourage effect, it's not the entourage effect. You've read something and you've learned something which is correct, and then you've applied it to a situation which is incorrect. And what you need to do as users is really start to understand what you're putting into your bodies. Because if you're completely cool taking a broad spectrum which might have trace elements of THC, then you need to be aware that if you go and get piss tested, you might fail this piss test. Now, if you don't know this, okay, then that's a big problem, and that's where my fear and the sound of my voice, that's where it comes. It comes from fear of an uneducated marketplace. You take your CBD drops, you get pulled over by the police, they do a swap, you can fail. Why? Because you have trace elements of THC inside of your drops, and these tests are very sensitive and they can catch you out. And it's very important as an end user to know the limitations of the cannabinoids you're using, or the advances of the cannabinoids you're using, but it's still about understanding.
Are you saying that it's impossible for there to be a cannabis plant that falls within the legal threshold of those compounds?
Yes, I'm saying it's fully illegal to have a cannabis plant which is a full spectrum and doesn't have a full spectrum of cannabinoids. It's physically impossible to have a rainbow without all the colours. It's physically impossible to have a full spectrum without the full spectrum.
So there was always more THC than under 0.2%.
As in, there's no strain. I think that's what you're asking. There's no.
There's no.
Well, on a very basic level, cannabis is hemp. Hemp is cannabis.
They're the same plant.
Something hemp when it contains under a certain threshold of THC, but it always contains THC. The plants look the same for purposes such and smell the same.
Grow the same.
Something is called cannabis illegal because it contains over a level of THC that makes it control, which makes.
So
it
there's
illegal.
no entourage effect on a hemp plant.
I would say the entourage effect, when people talk about cannabis oil and the entourage effect, they're talking about how other cannabinoids affect THC. And us as a CBD market in the UK have taken these very broad blogs and applied them to our market. Why? Because you change the word THC to CBD and change other cannabinoids to keep it as other cannabinoids. And you've got a very well written, very educated sort of blog, which is actually doesn't make any sense because it's been bastardized.
It's 2 different products.
To kind of move it on a step, like efficacy, right, of each of these things, distillate and isolate, and I know we can talk about full spectrum, broad spectrum, and that could be the whole conversation. No. It's part of this conversation. But I guess in terms of formulation, and also from a market perspective, like what people are kind of leaning towards. We talk about mathematical accuracy. Like if you say you're going to have 1,000 milligram in a bottle, then does distillate hinder that process because of variability, this percentage fluctuation in it? Is that something that we need to consider?
Well, again, it's for me. It's down to it's down to labelling. There's many brands that we work with that put 1,000 milligram of hemp oil in their product and don't reference that it's 1,000 milligram of CBD in its full strength. But I think the real focus now, and I've tried to desperately not talk about it every single time we have a conversation, but it's novel foods. And really what consumers want is to ensure that they've got longevity, and there's a general perception that CBD isolated, because of the uniform process and the ultimate result of having something which is 100% pure at the beginning and doesn't change is a safer bet to ensure longevity. So I think it's fair to say, looking over the trends over the last 4 years or so, when the business first started, there was a huge push, and only a push, on CBD isolate because of the mathematical accuracy that gave. There was then the novel food rumours started to, the rumbles became louder and louder, and the market lost confidence in isolate as a product, and then this world of distillate or high purity CBD distillate appeared out of nowhere.
I think it's the McDonald'sization, isn't it? It's why is distillate more popular than isolate? Because more people sell it. That is the only reason why distillate's more popular. We have all received our education from somewhere, someone, someplace. And that education, if it's all focused on a broad spectrum or a distillate or whatever it's going to be called, you're going to believe that's what's right for you.
I don't think it's about it was nothing to do with that. It was nothing to do with that at all. It was to do with people pushing an agenda to make people that were totally uncertain in the market buy a certain product at a price point.
But they pitched it based on things like the entourage effect, etc. No?
Really, it was to conform with novel foods, and then that narrative took more and more prevalence, and then I think, I'm not going to be so specific and talk about dates, but I think when people understood that novel foods was a real thing and started to understand what that meant, all of a sudden isolate was the favour again. It coincided with the time that I think CBD isolate was so overproduced in America that it was a kind of a sweet spot of a few things where I think the credibility came back for isolate generally, and the mathematical accuracy that brought, together with price points dropping from what was 12 grand down to £1,500
for like a kilo, right? That's
for a kilo. So that started the race to the bottom, and I think we're now in a position whereby Ed, I've done the thing of talking over you again, but I think generally speaking, for us, it's been because of price point, because of security over longevity. It's now seems to be isolate.
Yeah, in large part, it's isolate all the way in terms of compliancy. But from like a sales manager standpoint and chatting with customers every day, people are interested in both. So you always have to understand where the consumer's coming from. Of course, like Ollie said, they're always reading stuff online or educating themselves via their own means.
How dare you quote me?
You love it, really.
And the retailer ultimately
live on radio.
The retailer ultimately is going to guide that customer to have. Do you want a fruit salad like Ollie explained it, or a strawberry? Yeah. Naturally, the consumer wants the fruit salad. They want to explore and understand what's in that.
To use that metaphor, I can't help but jump in and say the disappointment is you get the fruit salad and all it is cucumber with like a little bit of
maybe a kiwi.
It's a shit salad, but that's the point. It's
watered down for sure.
I think when people truly understand what they are getting and are interested in getting
or the deluxe salad. Yeah. Of course, I'm going to go for the deluxe salad. Well, the deluxe salad. It's just strawberries.
Yeah, but actually,
there's a little bit of vinaigrette.
But
the vinaigrette is on the side anyway with the normal strawberries, and the strawberries are half the price.
Enough for the metaphor. Stop the metaphor.
I was going to say this because a lot.
Back to wrapping.
In terms of what I've seen in the marketplace, a lot of people use distillate and made it seem premium, but actually distillate's cheaper than isolate. Is that wrong?
No, I mean it's a commodity. It's a different. There's no point in having that conversation. I think I'll go back to the point before and say people thought they were buying distillate because it was as close to a genuine broad spectrum as you can, without realising that when you're going cheap and buying 80-90% purity, it's sort of the word. It's neither pure CBD nor is it a close to a full spectrum. It's an artificial something in the middle, and you can those that go for that
the high percentage CBD
are in it for the wrong reasons and don't understand.
Might as well at least
they don't understand what they're doing.
At least spread your bets. Go for a 50-50 or
be in one camp. We see that people that are not educated and don't. I say that politely, but I think. choosing the base raw material you're going for is the whole ethos of your brand, as far as we're concerned, and it's the biggest decision, because that should set the tonality moving forward.
Absolutely.
Are you sports recovery? Are you a vanity brand? Are you daily drops? Are you focusing yourself on a actual, element or issue? As in, depending on what you want to do, you should choose a specific type of extract.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Talking about, and you touched on price point dropping in terms of raw ingredient from 12k to 1,500 quid, and I think it's still on a bit of a trend that way from my understanding. But I mean, what's been the knock-on effect to like outbound, like manufactured products, client-based products? Have you seen a relative price drop?
Yeah.
I was going to answer and say, depends if you're making a markup on your raw ingredient or not. We don't make a markup on our raw ingredient, so it's benefited our customers, that price drop.
Well, not only. Of course, it's benefited the customers, but in the same breath, those that haven't passed on that benefit to their own customers, i.e., price reductions and moving in line with the market, are really suffering, because this sort of the bottom fell out so quickly. People do what they want with their own businesses, but I think the margin is there now to make a product extremely affordable and still have the same relative margin. And those that, it's not a bad thing, but I suppose got a little bit greedy, have been caught out a little bit.
Also, this isn't a luxury product. This is a necessity for a lot of people. A lot of people actually need their CBD. So when you need something and it costs you an extortionate amount of money, you feel a little bit kicked.
That's a brand choice, though.
No, you feel a little bit kicked. But then, like you as an end user, you found a product that you can rely on. I understand it probably took you a long time to find that product. Both me and Nathan both have issues, which we both use CBD for, and it took us a while. I had to make the product, which basically helped for us, but it took us a while to find what worked for us. So I understand, as an end user, it could be a struggle. But there should be like a little bit of give and take in this market now. Like the prices have dropped by 60%. So that end user price should be comparable. We've seen a couple of brands emerge in the last few months which are extremely affordable. We've brought an affordable brand to market, on purpose. I don't know, am I allowed to drop that?
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about it.
Can I drop that? I don't know. But yeah, we've brought an affordable brand to market. We want to try and make things right for the end user, because without you guys, there wouldn't be a CBD market in the UK. You are the reason why we are successful manufacturers. If you guys didn't buy our products with all the different faces on them, then we wouldn't be here right now. So the fact of the matter is you guys deserve to be able to buy CBD for the price it should be. Not the price we want it to be, or not the price the seller wants it to be. It's the price it should be.
Ed, just out of interest, like, I'm sure when you're selling and kind of positioning white label services to clients, like we have suggested RRPs, I assume, for like strengths. Is that being received well? Isn't like I know there's a few of your outbound clients that you have that you've suggested price drops to go, look, the market's going that way, we have to do it. But how's that come across?
Yeah, it goes back to passing on the cost savings of the raw material. Everybody, or at least we tell people that the raw material price is constantly coming down. We often suggest RRPs, and work with clients on getting to a final on-the-shelf price, then reverse engineering back to wholesale, distro, manufacturing costs, etc. We help out through that entire process. And the feedback's been great. You can see it in e-commerce. Products are selling better when they're it's
priced
competitively. It doesn't cost an arm and a leg, for a 10 ml tincture. So yeah.
So I think it probably took us a bit longer than we perhaps expected, but we certainly hated the question. I think we took us a while to realise that really a successful brand is not the one that can talk about why their CBD oil is better than the next one. It's a futile conversation, despite us feeling that we are the best manufacturer in the rest of it. But it's kind of it really is just down. It's down to the brands and positioning and price point to make the difference to the next one.
It doesn't mean everything has to be cheap. Everybody's
cheap
still
is different from affordable.
Affordable. Everybody has the right to mark up their product, however which way they want to position it. If they want to be in luxury retail and they want to be at £100, then fine. But I think the deciding factor in marking your product up should have nothing to do with the CBD.
But as an end user, you should know that, you know, if you're buying from a reputable brand, you know, the CBD, the product's going to be the same, unless it's like something extremely special, you know, not in terms of CBD, but in terms of the other ingredients. CBD, you know, if it's organic or if it's natural and from hemp, and it's, you know, the certificates of analysis match up, you know, pound for pound, kilo for kilo, CBDs are the same. If on paper they're the same. So it's quite important to know that your end product, which you're buying for 100, is probably similar, if not exactly the same, as the product which is being sold for 30. And as an end user, that price point is a branding thing. It's not a manufacturing thing.
Let me just, because I think just to round this off, I know we've talked about labelling and education, and barring what we've discussed here, which should explain to a listener what it's about. I mean, and this is a suggestion, should it be labelled like, for example, it's 1,000 milligrams of distillate? Obviously, like, as in, how do we get this message to new brands that are coming on the market or existing brands to go, what's the standardization? If you carte blanche, what would you do?
I think the truth is I wouldn't do anything, and I think the answer is in choosing if you want to be educated as a consumer. I mean, we use the metaphor quite a lot. I don't know if it's come up on these podcasts before, but the Tom Ford aftershave discussion, in as much as it's an aftershave, I personally have got no interest really in what the ingredients are, how they're extracted, the purity of one thing over another thing. I like the smell, it stays on me for a long time. I pay the insane amount of money that it is for Tom Ford aftershave, and I think, you know, we had it with don't delve into the detail of it, but, you know, women are extremely sensitive, or I'll rephrase it, my wife is extremely sensitive over what she puts on her skin, and has a true understanding of ingredients and percentages that are right for her. I would suggest in time the market becomes more educated and actually understands what they're looking to buy, which therefore they're more informed, and they know they want to buy a distillate that a COA reads in a certain way because they're more educated. At the moment, you're supplying a market that just have no idea. And that's where that kind of, the thought of predatory nature or selling something to make it seem something that it's not is
wrong.
It's totally wrong. And but I think that can be wrong to a certain point, but I think that is, it's not necessarily they're looking to trick the consumer, it's just not educated enough, and there's only so much you can do.
It's the same thing, look, it's like to give another metaphor. I love a good metaphor. If you go to Tiffany and you buy a diamond, is that diamond better than going to a jeweler in Hatton Garden who's going to charge you a third of the price? If you get the same 1 carat diamond, which is a G clarity,
SG1, is it SG2?
Is it, hold on, those two diamonds, is the Tiffany one better because it's from Tiffany? No, because Tiffany don't stamp their diamonds Tiffany, and as soon as you take that diamond out of the Tiffany gold band that is in, it's just a diamond. So as soon as you take that CBD out of that branded bottle, it's just CBD. And it's very important that the market knows from their perspective that it's cool to buy a brand, that's completely fine. But you're just buying a brand. You're not buying a better product, the same way you're not buying a better diamond.
I get most of what you're saying, but then also the argument would be, you know, and I understand the conversation is about CBD and distillate, but if one formulation could be better than another formulation, or provide more benefits or additional benefits other than the CBD, which would therefore warrant a higher price.
Yeah, but then that...
No, you're having two conversations, because you're a purist who cares about the CBD thing, and James and I come from a more commercial background where we're advising brands on building and positioning correctly. It's
I think the theory is not wrong. If you took two CBD oils from different brands, one's charged 200 quid and one's charged 50, and you looked at COAs and they're identical, then Ollie's statement is completely correct, right? Like, it's just based on brand value.
It's the same with any bottle of water. You can go buy it. It's the same. What would be a really interesting exercise to see is over the next 6 months between now and I suppose novel food validation, what the overall trend is and compare that to the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Because I think you will see a completely different shift
in terms of
the preference of raw material.
People moving more towards
but
isolate.
that preference is driven by what is more easily achievable in testing. So isolate is going to be easier to test than full spec or broad spec. So naturally the industry is going to be is going to go towards less risk.
Let's see. I'll be very interested because I'm not seeing that on the front line quite yet.
I mean, for me and my experience, I often have to pull it back to where I've worked and where I've seen customers be educated, which was in California. And so I guess as we're looking at the market we're in right now in the UK, we're kind of in this it's legal, but it's pseudo-educated, heavily regulated market where we have to adhere to less than 0.2%. We have to use isolates. I mean, the elephant in the room is what's the strategy moving forward when it all gets legalized? Is the UK going to look more like California, where customers get educated very quickly? The impact of the entourage effect of certain strains of hopefully brick and mortar retail and the whole customer, point of sale, great, customer service becomes incredibly important. Do the days of isolate die and people become more interested in full spectrum, full plant extract? Because I'll be honest, California's, and you guys all know, it's 5 to 7 years ahead of where we are here.
25 years ahead of where we are here.
Perhaps, right?
It all falls back to the label.
You started in the 90s, 95. Right. 95, the medicinal system started in California.
Exactly.
95, 25 years ago, quarter of a century.
Using that logic and assuming that we're going to learn the lessons from America.
And that's a big assumption.
No, but what I'm saying is that you sort of, I think, raised quite an important point, or nice way to finish the discussion, is that, yes, there are examples of people that want to get just super high, but I would think in terms of what I've seen in a dispensary, even the edible products have a spectrum of different cannabinoids. It's not just isolated THC, which in my mind you think was so obvious.
And then,
so I reckon that will end up, like you say, I reckon it will happen exactly like you say.
Assuming,
we can get to close to a full spectrum. CBD isolate will...
Assuming prohibition ends, which is more than likely.
But then the vape side in America...
Yeah, that's a whole nother...
Well, it's like the vape side on this side. It's like in the vape side in the UK, everyone uses isolate.
Yeah.
And in the vape side in America, everyone uses distillate, which is actually isolated THC, which is also very confusing.
Yes. Right. I think that just to round this off, firstly, I think this CBD of isolate, distillate, full spectrum, broad spectrum, very much more educated now. Thank you very much. I think anyone that has listened should be. Obviously, there's so many avenues we can talk about, and yes. If we can follow California's trend, then potentially, obviously the current status is that isolate's kind of leading the front because of novel foods and what people deem as easier to manage, etc., and create, and prices dropping because overgrowing, overly extracted, and prices dropped. Maybe that might go back up when so many farmers come back out of the market, realizing that everyone got involved and now there's not enough space for all of them. They're all big question marks. I'm really intrigued that in 6 months' time, what is the trend? Yeah. And in 12 months' time, if prohibition ends and legalization, decriminalization, whatever that looks like, what happens then? They're big question marks that if we had a crystal ball, we'd all be laughing right now. We don't. But I think, continuing that conversation is really important. Barring that, I want to say thank you to all of you. I hope it was an enjoyable experience, albeit maybe a little bit fireworky and people disagreeing and agreeing. But that's part of what a podcast is about, is to have a conversation. If anyone's got any questions, wants to find out more, do get in touch with Taylor Mammon. Obviously, they are kind of the forefront in white label manufacturing, but also have brands, products that they have ready to go that you can jump in with. And all of the guys here, their emails will be available. So, and they're lovely people. They like to have a chat, as you can tell. So barring that, thank you very much for listening. This has been Taylor Mammon's podcast. Thank you.